In October of 2006, New Orleans police arrive on the scene of a suicide. The victim, a 28-year-old man, had jumped to his death. Upon arrival, police find a Ziploc bag in his pocket, along with some dog tags that read Zachary Bowen. Inside the Ziploc, a folded-up note read, "This is not accidental. I had to take my life for the life I took." Well, hello, oddballs. It's your host, Bobby.
And your co-host, Lexi.
And this is Oddities on Elm Street. Today we're going to be covering a very disturbing case, so please keep that in mind. This may not be the episode for everyone. But before we get into exactly what took place on the day of Zachary's suicide, let's first talk about who Zach Bowen was. In 1995, Zach found himself in New Orleans. He had grown up in California but decided to stay in the Crescent City after a cross-country road trip with his father. Zach began working at a bar there where he quickly met his future wife, a woman named Lana. Lana quickly became pregnant and then found out that Zach was only 17 while she was a decade older than him.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, and after this, Lana tried to break things off with him, but Zach decided he wanted all of them to be a family. He didn't want his children to be fatherless, so the pair married soon after that. And then, in May of 2000, the couple had baby number 2. In order to care for his growing family, Zach decides to join the Army for the benefits it could provide. During his time in the military, he deployed to Iraq, and upon his return home, Lana said that, quote, "He was just different, like emotionless. He wasn't the man I married," so she took their 2 children and left him. And Zach was devastated by that. But in order to kind of fill his time and avoid feeling so lonely, he continued to put himself out there by doing odd jobs around the French Quarter after being discharged from his time in the service. He ultimately returned to his bartending job in the summer of 2005, this time meeting another woman that caught his attention. By this time, Zach was now 27, and his new coworker, 29-year-old Addie Hall, had him absolutely enamored with her, but she wasn't really interested in him. She was a very free-spirited person. She loved creative dancing, painting, poetry, so an Army vet wasn't really someone she imagined herself being with. But after some time with the two flirting back and forth, she decided to give him a chance. So now it's late August of 2005, and this is a week before Hurricane Katrina would hit. Addie had found out that Zach was still technically married and had 2 children.
Surprise!
Obviously,
that's quite something to learn.
Yes, and this, understandably made her furious, and they got into a huge fight about it, but she ultimately did decide to stay with him. So when Lana, Zach's ex-wife, called, scared, wanting Zach to come home to be with her and their children, Zach decided to stay with Addie in New Orleans to show her that he did love her and was really dedicated to her and her only. So together they rode out the Category 5 hurricane in their apartment, which is so brave.
And, I mean, I don't know. I remember when it was happening back in 2005, I was very young.
Yeah.
9 years old.
Right.
But I just remember, my mom watching TV and just being, in awe and horrified.
Yeah.
Because it was just horrendous. Not even just the storm itself, but
the devastation.
And the circumstances surrounding it that led to further devastation with the government not doing
their job.
Levees broke that should not have. And Swindle does a fantastic episode on Katrina. Highly recommend listening to that. It's just gives me chills.
Yeah, and I don't think that anyone could have been properly prepared for it. There's no way anybody could have known just how bad it was going to get.
Right.
And 80% of the city was underwater after Hurricane Katrina. and there were upwards of 200,000 houses destroyed, 1,800 people dead, and the entire city had just been cut off from the rest of the world with no way to communicate.
It's like an apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's insane. I can't imagine.
And during that time, Zach and Addie had sort of deepened their relationship in a way through like trauma bonding by riding out this storm together. And then together they experienced life after the storm. There was no work, no responsibilities, no bills, no police. They ate and drank with fellow survivors. They had sex in the middle of the streets. They had no rules, no one to answer to, and were almost living on a high. But it was a short-lived high, and pretty soon, reality would circle back around and slap them both in the face. They had to continue their lives. They had to go back to work. They had to resume their normal, everyday lives. And this is when their relationship really begins to show its toxic face. They were drinking heavily, doing a lot of drugs, getting into fights, and would use more drugs and alcohol to cope, which inevitably led to more fights. PTSD was back knocking on Zach's door, which made him fall deeper into the hole that he was already digging. He began to show extreme signs of possessiveness and became jealous of the men that were giving Addie attention at the bar. He hated that she would dance on the bar and despised seeing the way other men would look at her. So tensions grew between the couple, and Zach started sneaking out at night and having one-night stands with other people.
Projection.
Yeah.
Classic projection.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just so unhealthy.
Very.
Like, if you're going to have a job that you are a bartender that is dancing on the bar and flirting with guys, and that's just part of your gig, fine. That's great. But maybe, like, have a conversation with your significant other and have, like, boundaries set in place.
Yeah.
And
well, it's hard, too, when it's being thrown right in your face. Like, you have to sit and witness that.
Oh, yeah.
And then if the two of you don't have healthy communication where you can say, hey, this bothered me, without it escalating into, you know,
it's just going to stew.
A brawl.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then
you, on top of that, you have untreated mental illness.
After going through this traumatic life event.
Hurricane. And I was reading somewhere, too, that really, like, Hurricane Katrina really drew out a lot of the PTSD symptoms from Zach, just seeing the devastation.
Right.
And also just, like, the police takeover, pretty much, like, the police presence that New Orleans now was facing to try to keep things under control. For some reason, triggered him. I was reading about one of the experiences that he would often, like, remember was during his time in Iraq. He supposedly, like, watched a family with young children get killed, and that was just a memory that would replay for him when he would go into these bouts of, like, you know, the trauma would kind of
that's horrible.
It is, but then at the same time, it's like Addie is still the victim in this.
Oh, 100%.
And so it's like
100%.
You can't excuse what's taken place because of something that realistically it was his responsibility to get help for that. And unfortunately, he didn't. So,
well, and PTSD is obviously horrible, but there's so many people who have it that don't brutally murder their significant other. It's just another piece of the pie of this crazy story.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, he starts sneaking out, sleeping around with other people, and then one morning he goes around telling all of his friends his plans of leaving Addie. He claimed he was leaving New Orleans and had already bought an Amtrak ticket to Washington State. And Addie woke up to a note telling her the same thing. The night before, they had had a huge fight after heavy drinking, and Zach had hit Addie for the first time, leaving her face covered in bruises. Now, Zach did leave, But after a few weeks away, he had a change of heart and returned to Addie, and the two of them picked up right where they left off. They were still consuming dangerous amounts of drugs and alcohol. Fighting was occurring nearly every single day, and the couple was constantly breaking up only to get back together once again. As we know, this toxicity started pushing their loved ones away from them and in turn only isolated them further. After one of their fights and in an attempt to reignite their passion, the two of them decided they wanted to try to start over and get a new apartment. I think the apartment that they were at was only in Addie's name. I could be wrong about that.
I don't know, but I know that Addie got in a fight with the, landlord, thank you.
I saw that in your notes, but I couldn't what do you call that?
Reference?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out. So you must have seen it in like maybe the documentary that you watched?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because everything I saw was saying that they had like gotten into a big fight, and then as a way to kind of like clean the slate and start fresh, they decided they wanted to go get a place together, like the two of them. Because I think that Zach was just staying in Addie's apartment.
Because it was hers that they stayed in during Katrina.
During Katrina, exactly. So, but there's a lot of confusion around.
Well, and this was, part of it was like partially her plotting revenge because she had found out about
Zach cheating.
An affair specifically with a man, and her best friend on the documentary said that she was homophobic.
Really?
Which is,
okay,
to me, definitely does not go hand in hand with free-spirited, whatever.
That's surprising.
And it's unfortunate, and I mean, that's not even the right word for it, but that's reality. Is she was homophobic, and then in her toxic relationship, her significant other cheats on her with a man.
Now, before this, do you know, had she found out about, sleeping around with other women and was more accepting of that?
I believe so.
Okay.
I think that, I mean, not necessarily accepting, like she was obviously still like fucking pissed, but the fact that he had been with a man, I think is what like really, really, really set her off.
Okay.
I can't wrap my head around it, but that is because her best friend is on the documentary and talks about it. And
what's the name of the documentary, just so our listeners can go check it out if they want? Do you remember?
I think it's like Handsome Devils.
Oh. Yeah, you're right. Handsome Devils, Hurricane Love is the name of that. Which I did not watch. I just used online sources. So what you're telling me is new to me. So
from what I've gathered, I think that, she got in an argument with her landlord, whatever, but then had kind of plotted this revenge in her head because of the affair with another man, that she got Zach to pay put the down payment.
The deposit, yeah.
Right, thank you, the deposit down. And then behind his back went and made a lease with only her name on it.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, and given whether he cheated with a man or a woman, that shouldn't matter, but it
absolutely shouldn't.
I understand the retaliation. Not because it's a man, but because you were cheated on.
Right.
So
I mean, their lives are just nuts. I mean, there's
the way they're partying and drinking and the drugs.
Everything. Yeah. Nothing is stable.
Right.
Everything is chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just one of those things, though, that it's like, I just want to make sure people know she wasn't deserving of anything that happened to her because she went and did this.
No.
One little thing to try and get back at him for cheating, because there was a podcast, and I'm not going to mention them by name, but there was a podcast I listened to that really victim blamed Addie.
That's shitty.
For what's about to unfold here. So
are you serious?
Yes, and I just want to make sure
that
people don't get that impression from us.
Absolutely not. No.
So yeah, I do talk about that a little bit as well, and I'll get into more of the details, but Pretty much the couple, they were walking down Rampart Street and they came across a for rent sign. And this particular apartment was right above the famed voodoo temple in the area. So the couple moved in shortly after discovering the place, but obviously, as we know, this was not the change they needed to make their relationship work. And in fact, things were about to get a lot worse. During one of their many arguments, Zach told Addie that if he couldn't have her, then no one could. And if you don't think it's possible for things to get even worse after a statement like that, you're wrong, because like we mentioned, things did get worse when Addie found out that Zach had cheated on her with a man. And for whatever reason, that particular affair enraged her in a way she hadn't experienced before. It's also important to note that Addie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was prescribed medications to treat that, but didn't take them as regularly as she should.
Especially with the hurricane?
Yes, and then you have drugs and alcohol mixed into that, fueling just the outburst and the violence. And so once Addie found out about the cheating, like we mentioned, she went behind his back and asked the landlord to make sure that Zach was excluded from the lease. And that was the last straw for Zach. He was so enraged by that deception that he became inconsolable. So their fight escalated into the early morning hours of Thursday, October 5th, when it finally ended with Zach strangling Addie to death in a fit of rage. And in a drunken stupor, he had just fallen asleep next to her corpse on the futon. He also, this is hard to talk about, woke up in the middle of the night, committed necrophilia, and then went to work the next morning as if nothing had happened. His coworkers did recall that he was acting strange. He was like wearing sunglasses and a hat inside and was like being very like hush-hush, keeping to himself. And over the next several days, Addie's body was dismembered by Zach in the couple's apartment bathtub. He used a hacksaw and a knife and then went on to disperse her remains throughout the apartment. During this time, friends and family of Addie would run into Zach while he was out and about, and they would ask if he had seen her, but he claimed that she'd left him and moved back to her home in North Carolina. Well, hello, oddballs. Just a quick little break from our show to let you know how you can get more exclusive content from Oddities on Elm Street. If you're a fan of the show and just can't seem to get enough spook, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/oddities on Elm Street, where we upload case info, including crime scene photos from this week's episode. We have a new mini episode being posted for Halloween, and there's so much more to experience. Again, you can find us at patreon.com/oddities on Elm Street. Thank you for your support and enjoy the rest of today's episode. And then, as we know, on October 17th, 2006, Zach committed his final act of violence by jumping to his death from the 7th floor of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. When officers responded to the scene, they found that handwritten note and the army dog tags inside of a plastic bag in his back pocket, along with the keys to their apartment at 826 North Rampart Street. The front of the letter read, "Police only." Upon opening it, the letter read, quote, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. If you send a patrol car to 826 North Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge, and a full signed confession from myself, Zach Bowen." Police rushed to the couple's apartment, and when they arrived, they discovered a journal documenting everything. It read, quote, "Today is Monday, 16th of October at 2 a.m. I killed her at 1 a.m., Thursday, the 5th of October. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick. Halfway through the task, I stopped and thought about what I was doing. The decision to halt the first idea and move to Plan B, the crime scene you're in now, came after a while. I scared myself not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years and then desecrating her body, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known for forever how horrible of a person I am. Ask anyone. and decided to quit my jobs and spend the $1,500 cash I had being happy until I killed myself. So that's what I did. Good food, good drugs, good strippers, good friends, and any loose ends I may have had. I didn't contact any of my family, so that'll explain the shock, and had a fantastic time living out my days. It's just about time now. Zach Bowen. That's very disturbing.
It is. It is. And like the self-awareness of his lack of remorse.
Yeah.
Just gives me
chills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ugh. So, while investigating the apartment, police did notice that the air had been intentionally set at 60 degrees. They said it was almost like a meat locker. Addie's dismembered body was still in part laid inside of the bathtub, and on the walls read messages in spray paint. I love her, I'm a failure, and look in the oven with an arrow pointed toward the kitchen stove. What detectives discover next, I'm sure has stuck with them ever since.
I can't imagine.
So, like I explained earlier, Zach had dismembered Addie's body and dispersed the pieces of her corpse throughout their apartment. He had cut Addie's hair, post-mortem, and then placed her head inside of a pot on the front of the stove. He had also placed her small hands and feet inside of another pot on the back burner. Her legs and arms were found in a roasting pan that was placed inside of the oven, and her torso was wrapped in a black plastic trash bag and left in the fridge. Apparently, his intentions were to separate the bone from the flesh to more easily dispose of her remains. Some people speculated that he had intentions of cannibalizing her, but that was disproved in a later autopsy of Zach's body. They didn't find any signs of cannibalism. Mm-hmm. His autopsy did, however, reveal 28 cigarette burns on his body, which he explained in that journal were accounting for the 28 years of his life. And unfortunately, that's where our story has to be left off, because
that's it.
There is no accountability. We won't see Zach serve justice. That's just where the story ends.
It's tragic. It's tragic.
Yes, because after nearly 2 weeks of living in that apartment with Addie's body, Zach would go on to take his own life. That's it.
That's the end of it.
Yeah.
So,
it has been said that apartment is forever haunted by just the horrendous things that took place there. The landlord and numerous tenants have claimed that it's haunted. Nobody stays there for too long due to strange, unexplained activity, and it's now a paranormal hotspot. They've had a lot of paranormal investigators go there and study it, and before this took place, some believed that the dark magic associated with the voodoo temple could have drove Zach Bowen into madness, but in reality,
he was already there.
He was a troubled guy. He suffered from severe mental illness, and as such,
and substance abuse.
Yeah, and a case of domestic violence, unfortunately, just escalated into murder, with Addie being the victim.
Which is not surprising.
Unfortunately, it happens much too often. Something that I find really disturbing, though, is that the apartment where all of this took place is now being exploited. They've turned it into a museum and offer tours of the apartment where Addie was killed. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not a fan. Yeah. Well, that's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening and for showing your support. We hope you have a lovely week. And remember to always keep it spooky.